the recording. So let's just take about 4 to 5 rounds of breath for the purpose of presencing ourselves. Coming into our practice with intention. Also a great time to really feel into your body, sense where you are this morning. So the theme for today is hamstrings, back line of the body. We often don't see, right, the back line of the body. We feel it, I'm sure. And metaphorically, the back line of the body is said to support the front of the body. So as we move forward into the world, in that metaphorical sense, that metaphysical sense, the back body supports us. And often the back body is weak. And often our hamstrings, being part of the back body, are weaker than our quadriceps, the front line of the legs. And probably everyone in this class today has had some hamstring issue. If not, you have one currently. Pretty common. So the hamstrings, okay, there's actually 3 big muscles in the back of the leg. The semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, and the bicep femoris. And they attach to, I'm going to share something on the screen here if you want to check this out. Here are the 3, here's the back of the leg, the hamstring, and the 3 major muscles there. And then here's the attachment of part of the hamstring. Okay, almost not the full bicep femoris, but the part of the bicep femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. So that's your sitting bone right there, the ischial tuberosity. Okay, so there's an attachment point there. And my guess is that you probably have had a situation where you have a sore attachment point up at the sit bones of one or both of your hamstrings. I've had that for about a year. And it's a pretty tough fix. And you might have chronically tight hamstrings. We talk about them sometimes in isolation, but it's never isolated. Our hamstrings are part of the back body. So if we have tightness in the hips or the low back, we often have tightness in the hamstrings. We sometimes talk about if we just do more forward folds, we'll lengthen the hamstrings or loosen up the hamstrings. Actually, the way our muscles work is that we can't just lengthen muscles. Oftentimes the adhesions or the muscle being tight is in the fascia, the surrounding connective tissue. And so we have to loosen across the muscle to be able to have the elasticity to lengthen as well. And the job of the hamstring, of course, is to flex the knee, flex at the knee, and extend at the hip. So without the hamstrings, we wouldn't be able to stand up. We would just flop over, right? So we need the work of the quadricep, the front of the leg, and the work of the hamstring to be able to stand. We're going to focus quite a bit today on the structure, our skeletal structure, because this tends to be our hamstrings. If you have tight hamstrings, say you've probably had tight hamstrings for a long time. And if you're doing certain things to loosen up your hamstrings, you're probably getting the same result. And that could be that really you're not loosening up your hamstrings or lengthening your hamstrings. So it could be something else, most likely in your structure, which has been going on for a long time. So we're going to do some strengthening around the hamstring and the hamstring, and then some very specific work, incremental work that you can then come back to work on breaking up the adhesions in the fascia and getting a little more space in the hamstrings. So come to your back on your mat, and I'll move my body over to my mat. Have both your blocks and your strap. And just begin with your feet hip distance apart or so, arms to the side, and just begin with the pelvic tilts. All right, so on your inhale, you'll draw your pubic bone away from your navel, lifting the lower back off the floor. And on your exhale, press your low back into the floor and draw your navel up and in. And I really want you to over-exaggerate this a bit. So make the movements pretty big for now, because this is an important part of good hamstring health, is what we do with the pelvis, okay? And we'll look at a couple of examples of the pelvis being too far out of neutral and what that does to hamstring health. So as you continue the pelvic tilting, can you slow it down a little bit, or don't make it quite as big? So on your inhale, you'll draw the pubic bone away from the navel, getting length in the front of the body. And then on your exhale, try not to let your back touch the floor. So you stay more in a neutral spine as you inhale and exhale. So much more subtle movement. And you could even put your hands to your hip pointers, so the front, the bony part, the front of your pelvis, right? And just feel the movement of your pelvis forward and backward. Okay, and so now everybody draw your pubic bone away from your navel. Have your hands on your hip pointers. Okay, this is called anterior pelvic tilt. So I'm tilting my pelvis forward. And then tilt back, pressing your low back into the floor this time. And this is called posterior pelvic tilt. So we have anterior, forward, and posterior back. So we're going to come back to those terms later on. Let's leave that for a minute and just stretch your legs long. Stretch your arms overhead. Reach through everything and just get a big cat stretch, maybe pressing through one heel, same arm. Just opening through your side ribs, side waist. And then take both feet to one side and both arms to the same side. Big side bend here, just really opening through everything. Great. And then bring your feet back to, soles of your feet back to the floor, arms nice and wide, and just let the knees move softly back and forth. Feel now how one side of the pelvis lifts up, and that same knee crosses midline, and then the other direction, just back and forth. Again, just more or less a body scan here this morning, but just working back and forth with the knees, just getting a little space in your low back, pelvic area. And then from here, we'll come back to center, and you'll take your belt and take your belt onto the ball of just one foot. And the other leg can be straight on the floor, or you could have that leg bent. And then just bring your knee in to the outside of your chest, and then straight back up to as straight as per your capacity. So just moving, bending the knee, bending at the hip. And you could have your leg might not go up to vertical. It doesn't really matter. We're just moving in the joint spaces here, getting a little warmed up. And then you'll switch, take the belt in the other foot, same thing. Okay. Perfect. Then we'll just take the belt over to the side, and we'll just do a few spinal rolls. Okay, so feet just hip distance apart, and heels pretty close to your buttocks, and here just press into your feet and lift your hips and allow your arms to come behind you, and then roll that down. Again, we're going to come back to this and really concentrate on some of the musculature that we tend to ignore that affects our hamstrings. But for right now, just a easy flow, feeling into your spine. Paying attention, you have the natural curve in your neck. So you want the, maybe you're looking up at the ceiling versus looking at your chest, okay? So you have the curve in your cervical spine, in your neck. Good. And then just come back to center, and then you can turn to one side and press yourself up, or you could cross at the ankles and rock up to a seat. So we're going to be moving back and forth between some lengthening or stretching or opening and some strength activities. So we want to set up in Dandasana. And as you do this, I want you to pay particular attention to your low back. And I'm just going to come up on my knees for a sec here and just give a little visual. So if I have excessive anterior tilt, I will have an arch in my back, too much arch in my back, booty sticking out pretty far, if you can all see that. And that's a pretty excessive anterior tilt. And if I have excessive posterior tilt, I sort of have maybe even a rounded back, pretty flat back, and thighs pointing, pushing forward. So I want to find a neutral spine. So as you straighten your legs out for Dandasana, everybody start with your hands behind you. So you sort of have a pike position with your body. And in this position, however far back you need to be, so that you have this little bit of arch in the low back. That's where we want everybody to start. Now, with the legs, can you feel your legs completely engaged in the floor? Pull your toes back towards your shins as if you're pressing your feet into a wall. And if you come back to the recording, or you could remember this, or you could even do it right now, if you had a wall, be even better. You could press your feet into a wall. Then from here, engage, press into your heels and feel how that engages the hamstrings. Isometrically draw the heels back towards the hips. So keep the toes pulled back, and we want to line up the knees, okay, with about the second toe or the third toe. So knees are lined up with second or third toe. Now, anatomically, we're all different, so there's some variation here. But the problem that we often have when we have pain in the hamstrings or unhealthy hamstrings is a structural problem. So as I walk, if you're able to walk your hands further, closer to your hips, so you start to straighten out, and you're going to stop whenever your back loses that natural curve. So if you lose the little natural curve in the lumbar, that's where you stop. But if you're able to come to this 90-degree angle, great. Take your hands underneath your knees and feel you have like two kind of cords on either side of your knees. Ropey, cordy, connective tissue there. So feel for an evenness in the two sides of your knee pressing down to the floor. That's going to help you line your knees up with your toes. Okay, so you might notice, and it's easier if you close your eyes, you might notice that the inner cord pulls a little stronger towards the floor, or the outer cord. So see if you can line up the two sides evenly and press into the floor. If you sense that you might overextend your knees, hyperextend your knees, you could roll up your mat and from the feet up to the knees and just set that underneath your knees. You might even be able to feel it better. I'll just show that real quick. You could just take the end of your mat and roll it up and set that right under your knees there. You're not back in the same position. If you need to back up and start over, you could do that. But now this is our Dandasana, okay? Feet as if you're pressing into a wall or pressing into the wall. Draw the heels isometrically back towards your hips. Press your heels also into the floor and feel the engagement of the hamstring. So this is our first hamstring stretch. Great. Now, if you've got your mat rolled up, you can unroll the mat, and then you can come back down to your back. Take your strap. Take your both feet in the strap now, and take the legs up. And now we're doing the same thing, but we're on our back. Now notice here, as you press your feet into the strap, did you lose that little arch in your back? So if you feel your whole back is pressed into the floor, can you slightly tilt your pelvis forward anteriorly? Draw your navel up and in. That's what the abdominals support this structural alignment. And then pressing into the strap with your feet, pull back against the feet with the strap. Engage at the navel and legs, as perpendicular as possible in your body to the floor. This is the same stretch, Okay, but now you get a little feedback from the floor. So we're going to hold this stretch for another about 5 rounds of breath. And pay attention to whether you lose the connection. The low back sinks back into the floor. You relax at the abdominals. So keep that little arch in your low back. Good. And then we'll release the strap, set it over to the side. And again, you can push yourself up. Okay. Now we're going to come into doing a little support around the hamstring. So if you have 2 blocks, can be helpful. You don't need them if you don't have them, but it might help support you. And then bring one foot forward. The other foot is back. So both legs are at a 90-degree angle. With your hands on your hips or your blocks, hands on your blocks in any setup, we're just going to move forward and backward through the hips. So you could start with your hands on the blocks like so. Or you can bring your hands to your hips and come forward and then back up. So depending on your particular structure in the pelvis and whether you tend to be overly tilting the pelvis forward or you have a tendency to tilt the pelvis back, what happens in either of those situations is that some muscles get lazy and others get overworked. So without going into too much detail about which causes what, we're just going to kind of hit the whole area. So working in the psoas, this deep front muscle, working with the glutes, working with the hamstrings, working with the outer hips. Good. And then from here, just switch this up. So setting up the other side. And again, you can keep your hands on your hips as you move forward and back into position. Or you could have your hands on the blocks and come a little deeper. When you come back, it's more of a front hamstring stretch. Either one, working in the hips here. Great. And then we'll bring our knees back and your block's still out in front of you. And I'm going to suggest having them as tall as possible to start with. And turning the toes under, walking your feet a little forward and coming into Ardha Uttanasana, halfway lift. So we want the crown of the head, we want the head and the pelvis to be in the same line and moving away from one another. Now notice here, as you're standing, how is the weight distributed on your feet? So you want even distribution of the weight on the feet, just like when we were sitting in Dandasana. So you're pressing into the wall now. That's it. Now is the floor. And you want that natural curve in your back. The natural curve in the back. So notice whether your tummy is dumped too far and you have this really extreme anterior tilt, or if you're super rounded and you have a posterior tilt. Can you find neutral? For those of us that excessively anterior tilt forward and get the big arch in the back, draw the navel up and in. And then from here, just drop your knees to the floor. And you can move the blocks up to the front of the mat and come down to your back. Okay. So now let's work with some of the other muscles that get lazy. So one place that we can work to help support our hamstrings is the glutes. So bring your feet close to your buttocks and arms to the side. And we're going to start to press up into a bridge shape. But as you go, as you press into your feet and lift, can you notice, and I'm going to just pull my shirt up because I do this, I start to get this excessive anterior tilt. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to fight that a little bit, just keep a little natural curve in my back by drawing my navel up and in as I lift. Okay, and then I'm going to set my hips back down, and I'm going to repeat that somewhere between 10 and 20 reps. So noticing when you come up to the top of your press, the upper body there's a nice sort of straight line. So your belly's not lifted higher, okay, than everything else, but you're in a sort of a nice straight line. So paying attention to this little natural curve in the back. And some of us will tend to have too much curve in the back. You want to draw the navel in. All right, feel your glutes working here. And then we'll meet with the hips back on the floor. Okay, if you need to bring the knees into the chest for a quick breath, do that. And then we'll take the feet back to the floor. And now pick up your toes, press into your heels, and feel like you're going to drag your heels back towards your hips. Pressing into your heels, lift. Ooh, boy, you should feel your hamstrings engaged. And lower back down. And you might even get like, ooh, I got a little cramp in one hamstring there. Okay. So we're going to do a few rounds like that with the toes picked up, right? Draw the heels back towards the hips isometrically, like you're scooping your heels under your body. Remember to keep the pelvis in that neutral, as much as possible, that neutral setup. So you'll press up and back down. So now maybe you feel a little more hamstring turned on than your buttocks, your gluteus maximus minimus. Can you be honest? Stay honest in the arch in your back. Drawing navel up and in. And a few more, just like that. And then we'll let that go. And whatever you need to sort of counter that, pull the knees in, stretch long, or take some windshield wipers side to side. Because now we're going to try to do the same thing and get this equal engagement between hamstrings and glutes. So we're not relying on one exclusively or the other. So feet back to the neutral position. So you reach out with your fingers. You can just kind of barely touch your heels. That's about the right alignment for most of us. So let's begin by coming into a neutral spine, or a neutral pelvis rather. So you could just go to the both excessive ends and then find neutral. Draw navel up and in, pressing into your feet and pulling back towards your heels. Press up and lift. And lower. and lift and lower. And I'm just going to hover and not touch my hips down. And each time I'm checking, I'm going slow enough so that I can see as I lift up, do I still have the navel engaged? Am I still drawing the heels back? And do I still have just the right amount of arch in my back? Not overarching, but some anterior tilt. Maybe 10 more of these. And then we'll relax on the floor. Again, you could draw your knees in here, take your legs straight, or come into a windshield wiper, just releasing a little tension in your low back. Okay, and then we're going to turn onto one side and have the knees could rest on your head on your hand, or you could stretch your bottom arm out long, but the knees are coming pretty much straight out from the hips. And another really great exercise for the glutes and the outer hips is the clamshell. So we lift the top leg up and then bring the top leg down almost to meet the bottom leg. And we work about anywhere from 10 to 20 of these. And really, the slower we go, the more we really have to engage the muscles of the buttocks, the outer hip. So sometimes the tightness in our hamstring is that the hamstring is doing too much of the work, and we want to build these other muscles up and have them be part of the party. Good. So once you've done your chosen amount on one side, just flip yourself over and take the other side, and maybe go slow enough here to notice, oh, I think I have, it's easier on this side or it's more difficult on this side. So I have maybe a little imbalance on in my body this way. And that's probably most of us, since we're not perfect yet. And good. And then from here, we'll come right down to our bellies. So let's just begin by resting our forehead on your two hands and just maybe bending the knees here now and softly moving your feet back and forth. This is the same thing we do on our back, just to open up some space and give a little relief to the low back here. Great. And then come to straight legs and really pull your foot down, like really draw your legs long, taking the top of your feet into the floor. Now you could have your arms alongside your body or just right underneath your shoulders with your forehead on the ground, whichever kind of feels a little more comfortable for working with the hamstrings here. And then let's bring the top of the right foot into the floor equally. Feel that equally. Now, notice in this position whether your whole tummy is pressing into the floor. Can you draw your navel up away from the floor? And even if it doesn't feel like you made any space there, maybe intend to do that. And then lift the right leg. And take the right leg down. Press the top of the left foot into the floor. Pull the navel up away from the floor and lift the left leg. And back down. And then go back and forth just a few times, maybe 2 more times on each side. And if you need a rest in between, that's totally fine. You could take your forehead down to the floor. You don't even have to lift your head and shoulders here. You could just work with just the legs. But now we'll bring the pubic bone into the floor and feel for pulling your navel up away from the floor, pressing the tops of your feet into the floor to start. Lift both legs. And maybe you could press your chest up a little bit more and broaden through your collarbones. You could stay on the floor. You could have your arms out behind you, the locust pose. Really draw the navel up and in as if you were trying to lift it off the floor. And then release. Let everything go. Take the one cheek or temple to the mat and rock your hips back and forth, or bend your knees and take your feet back and forth, and then go to the other side. And then coming back to center, you can take your hands underneath your shoulders, tops of the feet into the floor. Press a pubic bone into the floor. So we're going for the neutral pelvis here. So draw the navel up and in, and then as you lift the legs off the floor, bend at the knees. Bend at the knees now, and see if you can press your feet up towards the ceiling. Up towards the ceiling. And then slowly let the knees come back down, release down to the floor. Again, let your pelvis move back and forth, your hips move back and forth in a way that feels supportive. Take the other side. Okay. And back to center. We'll leave the back bends for just a minute. So back bends, obviously, work the hamstrings a lot. Let's press into the hands now and up to table. And just a little reach back towards the heels. And then walking our knees forward, we're going to come back to the Dandasana on the floor. So starting with your hands back behind you, find the natural curve in your back. Press your feet into a wall or an imaginary wall. Again, if you need to roll up underneath your knees, so that helps you feel the contact of the knees, or you could bring your hands as you start to walk forward, bring your hands underneath your knees and feel for both sides of the knee pressing down evenly as you come forward. That'll line your knees up correctly with your feet. And then from your position where you have that little curve in the back, wherever that is for you, we're going to take 10 rounds of breath. Now, some of us will be able to come even further forward. We're just taking this incrementally today. But if you're feeling really warmed up and you can come forward, somewhere between 90 degrees and 120 degrees or so, you're going to round your back in this fold. Now, if you're deeper in the fold, press your heels into the floor and isometrically drag them back towards your hips. But keep the feet engaged all the way in the metatarsal arch. So even though you're pressing your heels into the floor, don't forget that you're also pressing your toes, big toe mound, pinky toe mound, into that imaginary wall. And then we can walk the hands back. We'll come back onto our backs. And we'll take the strap around the balls of the feet. And now we're in the same position, but now maybe you can get your legs a little closer to your torso. So start by setting up making sure your pelvis, you're engaged at the abdominals, so navel up and in, and you got a little arch, just a little bit of an arch, even an intention of a little bit of an arch below your lumbar, in the lumbar spine. And then press your feet into the strap, pull back with the strap. And maybe you can bring the legs closer to the torso. Watch what happens with your back though. If you collapse and you round the back into the floor and you lose the engagement in your abdominals, you want to correct that as you come. And you can really check out your knees here too, and how well they're lined up with the feet. Now from here, just slip out your left foot and keep your right leg extended. Take the strap in your right hand, bend your left knee. So we've done this quite a bit. The left knee and the right leg are going to move away from midline simultaneously and remain at the same angle. So the right leg will probably not go much further than about 45 or 50 degrees from midline. And then you'll draw the right leg in and cross it over the bent left knee. You come across your midline with both appendages, both legs. And then back to center, slip the left foot in and the right foot out, bending the right knee, place the sole of your right foot to the floor, and then again, let your right knee go out to the right and your left leg go out, same angle. So if you can, as far out as you can get your right knee, you have permission to go with the left leg. Now, can you feel for both sides of your pelvis evenly touching the floor? If not, you might have to pull the angle in a little tighter. Navel's engaged up and in. And you should feel a very slight anterior tilt in your pelvis. So that means that your pubic bone slightly away from your navel. Yeah, just a little arch in the back. And then bring this across. Left leg across, right knee across. Good. And then you can come back to center and just slip both feet in the strap just to make sure we have good symmetry before we move on to the next thing. So legs up towards the ceiling. Your legs might be, you might have your legs more like a pike position. Okay. So, and in fact, if everybody takes their legs a little bit in more of a pike position, you really can feel, right, probably that you have an arching underneath your back. As you bring your feet up more towards vertical, keep that arch, that slight arch in your back. As soon as you've collapsed and you're rounded in, you've lost the integrity structurally for stretching the hamstrings. Okay? So we want to keep that little arch in the back. Really paying attention to that. Good. Now we'll slip both feet out and we'll come to our bellies. And we'll do another really awesome strengthening for the glutes and the abdominals, and that's our forearm plank. So you can interlace your hands and your elbows right underneath your shoulders. Let's begin really, really intentionally by drawing the navel up and in, drawing the pubic bone off the floor, the thighs off the floor. And again, so we're going for, we don't want an excessive arch in the back, and we don't want to be rounded in the back. So as you turn your toes under, we want that pretty straight line. So navel up and in, press the forearms into the floor. Draw the navel up and in, press through your heels, and your head just looks, you know, your head is straight down. So if we were to put a yardstick on your back, the back of your head, the back of your through your back and into your hips would all be in a relatively straight line. Keep working it. And then you can come down to your knees, lower the thighs, lower the pubic bone, lower the navel, come all the way down to your belly, bend your knees, soft movement back and forth with the feet. And then we'll press hands into the floor, come up into tabletop. Take a few rounds of cat-cow here. And then we'll come back to standing with the blocks. If you have your blocks in the Ardha Uttanasana. So halfway lift. So with our hands on the blocks, press your feet evenly into the floor, across the middle tarsal arch and forward and backward. And then reaching the crown of your head away from the pelvis away from the crown. So lengthen the back, right? And then feel in your mind's eye, hopefully you can feel the natural curve of your lower back. Some of us might be able to take the blocks down one level or 2 levels. Okay, and what's important here is not that my back is parallel to the floor, but that I have length in my back. Okay. So I feel the natural curve in my low back and the natural curve in my cervical, my neck. And then slowly just walk your feet up to your hands. Okay, take your hands to your waist, draw your elbows in towards one another. You can have a slight bend in the knees as you press up. Good. And we'll come to Tadasana. I'm just going to move my mat a bit. So in your Tadasana now, feel for even standing in the feet. And you could play around with this now. You could come forward onto the toes and see what that does to your pelvis. Lift my shirt up again. So if you come forward onto the toes, does that create a little bit more excessive anterior tilt of the pelvis? If you come back onto the heels, does that create a more posterior tilt with the thighs forward? Find the middle ground. Hands on your hips. Find the middle. You might even play with, oh, there's excessive anterior tilt. There's excessive posterior tilt. And find the middle ground. Find the middle ground. Good. Now, reach your arms up above your head, palms facing one another. You could stay right here or take your gaze up to your hands. Okay, now press more weight into your heels and try to drag your heels back isometrically. Do you feel your hamstrings engaged? Now take more weight into your toes and try to drag your feet forward. Do you feel more engagement in your quads, in front of your legs? Go back and forth a few times with that. So more weight in the heels, isometrically drag the legs back, the feet back rather, and feel that engagement in your hamstrings. And then back to the more weight in the balls of the feet, the front metatarsal arch. Try to drag the feet forward. You feel more engagement in the quads. Now find middle ground. And then release your hands to your sides. And we're going to come and take a big wide stance. I'm going to suggest that if you have 2 blocks and this wide stance, because we're going to move into triangle, especially if you know that your hamstrings tend to be tight and sometimes the hip for this, you take one block this way and the other block this way. I'm going to go to the outside of my, whatever my front foot is, and I'm just setting it up. Now, I happen to have an injury, a hamstring injury, a very tight hamstring attachment on this right leg, my right leg. And so for me, actually, this is a way better setup. So I could bend my front knee. The block setup is to the outside of my front ankle. I take my hand to that block setup. If you only have one block, fine. If you're fine being on the floor, that's great too. Backhand to your hip. And then as you straighten the front leg, feel for this external rotation of the front leg, pressing evenly into the front foot, that toe, big toe mound, and the back heel, the back of the heel of that front foot. So there's an evenness through the foot. And you'll feel a stretch more in the inner leg, but this is a hamstring stretch. Back leg is strong. And now take maybe your other hand, this top hand, and kind of get a sense of, okay, what's my pelvis doing? Am I tilted too much anteriorly, so I'm poking my butt out? Or am I tilted too much anteriorly, so I'm rounded in the back? Find a neutral pelvis. Find a neutral pelvis. Maybe you take the top arm up. Head you could be looking down at the front foot or looking forward. And 3 more breaths here, friend. 3 more breaths. To come out, we'll bend through the front knee. Sweep the arms up. Now, because I supported, and this is just my personal experience, because I have this hamstring issue on the right side, with that big block setup, no pain, okay? So I'm not needing it on the other side, so I'll just take one block to the other side. And same thing, I'm gonna set my legs up first. I can bend through the front knee to place my hand on the block. Back hand rests on my hip, and then I begin to straighten that front leg. I want waist to be long, but now I'm paying attention here. What's my pelvis doing? So if I'm rounded at the back and bending over at the waist, probably need more height. I might even come up to my hand on my thigh. So I can keep that neutral pelvis. And then if it's excessively back bending here, right, can I tighten at the core and just find a neutral pelvis? So yes, there's a little arch in the back, but it's not excessive. And then to come out, we'll bend through the front leg and sweep the arms up. And let's come into, have both feet facing forward, lined up with one another. We'll come into a fold here. So again, now as we fold, let's pay attention to the pelvis, finding the neutral pelvis first. All right, so a neutral pelvis, meaning maybe a little anterior tilt, especially if you tend to round at the back, and then if you have too much tilt, too much anterior tilt, too much this way, can you draw the sit bones down a little bit, right? And then we'll fold at the waist. And here, any amount of support that you need, 2 blocks underneath the hands. No blocks. Some of you can bring your head down to a block, and you can have a little inversion here. But notice if you cross that edge into pain, we want sensation, but we don't want pain. So finding just the right amount of tilt in the pelvis. Hold this for 3 more breath cycles. And then from here, we'll heel toe the feet together and bending your knees any amount. This is going to be our final Ardha Uttanasana, halfway lift. Maybe you can come right down to the mat here now and find the pelvic tilt before you try to straighten the legs. Okay, now if you feel this at the attachment points and that's painful, you can lift your hands back up on some blocks or press more weight into your heels, and that should really put the stretch more in the belly of your hamstring, the middle of your hamstring. Weight in the heels. Yeah, and your toes might lift off the floor with that. And then we'll bend through the knees, come down to a seat, come to our final Dandasana. Again, start way back here. Okay, way back here. Really checking out the alignment. So toes are pulled back towards shins. And we have knees lined up with second toe. So you could feel what's my tendency. Because the thing is that if we're always practicing we're doing these openings, but we're always doing the same thing structurally, we're going to get the same result. And probably that means we're not going to change anything. So start back here, and then you could slowly walk your hands up. And if you're able to come here, you could probably reach underneath the knees and see for that even pressing down. So I know that when I was checking this all out, I'm like, oh yeah, I press the insides down way faster than the outsides. Good. And then if you have the space to fold, you can fold. And some of you, if this is just really quite easy, you can take a block to your feet and you can come into a deeper fold there. So what I have found is that for me, when I take some of those suggestions that my teacher might give me, I end up pretty sore the next day because I just went a little too far over my boundary, or I didn't keep the integrity in my pelvis. Then from here, we'll just slide forward, come down onto our backs. Here, you can bring the knees in, take a twist of your choice. We're about to finish. Sorry, just a little bit over today. but do what you need to settle back down. hmm And even in the shavasana, noticing if you tend to overarch the back here, it might actually be more comfortable to bring the soles of your feet to the floor and let your knees rest together. Whatever you choose to finish with, if it's comfortable for you, close the eyes back down. And just allow the softness now to lead. So allow yourself to drop into the floor. Nothing else to do here. And you can stay in your shavasana as long as you want. If you need to get going, you can move off to your next practice. And you can come back to a seat if you choose, or stay in the shavasana, but bring your hands to your heart center and just give yourself some gratitude for coming to practice today, showing up for yourself. And then gratitude for anyone else in your life who makes this possible. Intentionally, hands together at heart center. May the merit of our practice, the work that we do in practice, may that help us to unveil the hidden brilliance that lies within each of us, our divine birthright. Namaste.